I don't have a product, and I don't like API first. And I want to describe why I do this. Because we do a lot of projects in consultancy in regards of bringing people to the API world. And we do this, I would say, 5 years now. And it's not really reflecting what is happening. So Josh showed you something before. I will go deeper at a specific point talking about that. But at first, I'm working for Codecentric in Germany. We are a consultancy doing everything. So you can ask us anything in regards of Java, anything which is available in the world. And we do APIs, and that a lot. So API first is really something we shouldn't talk about, because it's just about prioritizing APIs within an organization. So as an organization, I have the idea of going digital. Maybe I need APIs, maybe I need them not, but this is the case actually. So APIs become the main part of my business model. So this is API first. It has nothing to do with typing things, programming things. It's really about changing the business model of an organization. So please don't talk about API first with development teams. It's nerve-wracking because they don't get what is really needed to start with APIs, to build APIs, because API first says nothing about how to build APIs. It's just there for the C-level. It's just something when you go to conferences like these and you have vendors there, they talk about API first. That's the main thing, to sell products, because it's easier to talk about API first because it's first in the name. So that is something you should do first. But it has nothing to do with what development teams are doing, because development teams are quite diverse, as we saw in the picture, and they really have to think about how to develop APIs. So they can do it design first, they can do code first, and they can do also a thing called prototype first. This is what something Ken Lane provided, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, saying, okay, I have an idea about an API and I do just prototyping the things. You can do this, but you shouldn't. So in the end, it's about design first and code first, but APIs are only a medium for data, so to transport data, nothing more. So there is nothing magical into APIs. We just transport data to some place. Even if we create a PDF document out of an API, we transport data to the PDF document to create it. That's all. So this is something we did at Codecentric to make it more easy, to more relaxed state, saying, okay, we talk about data. And API development is only doing things in the case of deploying a service with a specific API. So there is no need, no idea of data when I talk about API development. I can do crazy things with data when I develop APIs, because there is no restriction, there is nothing. We talk about governance in the context of APIs, but it doesn't really mean anything in regards of the data, because it's a totally different field. So we have to think about how to get data into the context. That's the most important step. So in the end, we will go to something like TypeSpec. We see it later, but we really have to think about how can we get data into the context with APIs? Because APIs are not the panacea, actually. So it is really hard to work with APIs, because normally they don't fit into the situation. So we often make assumptions saying, oh, maybe this REST API could help. But we didn't ask the people who want to deal with the data sets. So it's really on us to really think about, is an API really needed? On the other case, we have to deal with security all the time. A field a lot of people still missing, thinking about OWASP top 10 and all the things included, actually. And we have dependencies. When you think of something MuleSoft was doing in the mid 1020, saying, oh, you have to do something like you need APIs for the ground level, so the system APIs, you need process APIs, and then you have experience API, and you have to couple them. In the end, you're doing dependency problems. So you have to deal with dependencies in the end, and APIs might not help you, actually. And with this, it gets complex. So what we do actually, thinking about with APIs in the context, we really have to understand the customer needs or consumer needs. So really have to talk with the people who want to use our APIs. We work normally in contacts with big enterprises, so our main goal is to make it easier to access SAP data, because it's quite difficult to understand OData files and all the things involved actually there. So you really have to understand what does the consumer need. And maybe don't only think about use cases they are talking about. So the people actually think about to have data in transit, so there's always data in move. And they want to trigger functions because they need some specific stuff to be done by a data set delivered to the function, actually. That's the only thing they need on the consumer side. So really have to be more, I wouldn't say aware because this comes later. So we really have to think more as one side of the medal, because what we do right now is really saying, oh yeah, they are the data people. Let them talk. And we do the APIs, but in the end, we really have to combine the things. Because with the upcoming things of data mesh, by the way, who read the data mesh book until the end? Okay, that's interesting, because you should do it. When you're doing APIs, you should read data mesh. It's really needed for the whole context in the API world to understand what is happening there. Because, to make it short, 2 things that are written down in this data mesh book are data products and data contracts. When we think of what we are doing there is, we have actually API products, so we should really think about to deliver data products to become API products in the end. Because when somebody is matching up data to become a data product, they already thought about who would access the data. So again, it's about governance. So when we want to govern APIs, we should also govern data in this field. And data contracts could be helpful, actually, because they are the foundation. Because when I have a data contract, I know what somebody is delivering and what somebody else is consuming. It's the same with an API contract. Because I know what I'm providing, and I know what somebody else is consuming. So I can combine them, actually. By this, I can derive data models from the data contract, because this is the content of my API contract. This is what I'm delivering. So when I have a data contract available, it's part of my content of the API contract. And with this, I can really do things and say, okay, this is the data model. There is a restriction. I can't use this field because of it's not to be used because it's decrypted or something else. I shouldn't share the data. What it relies on is actually that we move into data operations. So everybody now knows API ops. 5 years or 4 years when we at Codecentric started with the topic, and also Melissa van Dijk at Kong started the topic, nobody knows about API ops. Now everybody is talking about API ops, and the same is with data, actually. So in the end, it's all about automated things to really move into the field and say, okay, I'm looking on the data side, and I want to do the same things I'm doing actually for APIs. At APIs, we are talking about linting and all the things to make it quite easy to understand what is needed. We can do the same with the data side. So it's not about doing data science or anything else in the data field. It's really about having data engineers who understand the needs of customers or consumers to provide data, and APIs are actually the medium to really bring up the data to the people. But how can we put this together with the API first not thing? It's really about, in the end, focus on developer success. Anyone has an idea why I talk about success? Because maybe some other wording might strive you in this context, because everybody else is talking about developer experience. Developer success is quite easy because we want to have success all over the place. So if a developer has a successful experience with what he or she is doing in the context of APIs, it will bring up better products in the end. So when we think about API products, it's quite easy to make a mess not out of it, actually. And when we look at the things developers are doing right now, Jason also pointed it out, actually when I'm an API developer, I want to handle YAML and JSON files. It's a mess. Because when you have bad designed APIs with a lot of endpoints or anything like that, it's a total mess to really go through the file and maybe use a linter for that, or you have a specific editor or something like that. In the end, these YAML or JSON files should be just artifacts, created automatically with all the things involved, linters, testing, and all the things, to make it quite easy and to really deliver success for the developer, actually. Not to say, oh, you have to look at this thing, you need to review the API description, blah, 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 have fun. It's 2,000 lines of code, because just having 200 or something, it's not the normal stuff. Normally in enterprises, we have more than 2,000 or 5,000 lines of API descriptions, so it doesn't really make sense. So the idea is to switch actually to code first, based on the data model. I heard Jason before. He said code first is not the best choice. Sometimes, when you have a good development team, it's the best choice to go code first, because people know what they do when they rely on frameworks and all the other stuff, actually. So for this, we need a specific development stack. So maybe you are working with Spring Boot and all the libraries involved, actually, and you're proficient in it. You will be faster than doing design first. That's a promise. Because you are sufficient in the things you're doing with the libraries or the frameworks you're using. Then you need a governed development process. Because you're generating stuff, so there should be some kind of governance in linting and all the things involved to really cover the stuff actually you're doing. And it should be documented and guided. So having something like Backstage running in the background to make it sure that everything works smoothly, because you're relying on templates, you're relying on everything what is actually needed to provide good APIs in the end. To think this idea further, this is what we did at Codecentric in the last month, is actually think about interface first. Because we are still thinking about Open API or other descriptions like async API, maybe protobuf or something like that. But what about thinking in the direction of just describing endpoints agnostic and using, again, some kind of design-first approach? And this is possible by just covering all the output ports of a data product. Because when I look at a data product, there are output ports described. So I can really describe how to access the data from the outside. And with this description, actually, we are able to design agnostic endpoints or agnostic interfaces for these endpoints. The tooling we can have a look at is, on the one hand, Microsoft TypeSpec, and on the other side, there is something else called Taxilang. It's coming out of the Kotlin universe, Cosmos, however we call it. But the two things do nearly the same. Because when I want to use TypeSpec, I need a good data model. Having a good data model by just using a data product, it's totally fine having this. And based on this, I'm able to write interfaces. And this is what we do actually by using TypeSpec and Taxilang. They're both evolving at the moment. So there's, for TypeSpec, I think, There's every month a new version available, so be careful when you use it, because it could be deprecated in some levels, or some changes actually. So there's sometimes very funny things happening with type specs there. And with TextLang, there is not so much evolvement because it needs some kind of converters actually to really obtain the possibilities of having a description which is agnostic. Going back to this, what also Jason showed us earlier with the type spec thing, is really that you can write something which is totally agnostic, so we don't have to think about how does it look like in the YAML file, what about the JSON that we use there. We can really write agnostic interfaces, even doing things like we see here with the status codes, saying, okay, this is a 201, there's a 404. What we did by just experimenting with it was to really build up the idea of problem details, to really make sure that it's possible to also have a type spec thing about that. And because it's TypeScript, I can use imports all the time. So it's really coming from the development side to give you speed. So if you have a data model and you think about, I could start an API of this, but I'm not really knowing what will be the idea of an API. Maybe there's an output port described for gRPC, there's an output port described for OpenAPI. Just write the spec with TypeSpec and use an emitter just to transform the things actually to OpenAPI or to gRPC. So you have only one file to describe the description actually of the API, and it can be used or reused actually as often as you want. You see it above that we are using models in here, and it could be also the place that we just import other things that are always used again and again. So really bring up the reusability factor. Out of this short one, what we see here is I just quitted some places there. I think it's about nearly 200 rows or something like that, or lines actually. So we can make big things quite small to make them understandable on the development side. And with TextLang, we have here something that is quite obvious and quite the same. So we really can work with annotation and something like that to bring out operation and services to really make sure that people are able just to start from a model that is covered by governance on the data side and make sure that they can deliver APIs very programmatically, not to think in OpenAPI, in protobuf or async API or whatever standard will arise in the next years. So it's really something to make sure I can reuse things, I can make things more obvious because it's easier to learn something like that before I have to learn OpenAPI, because in the end, when you look at yourself, nobody of us really understands the specification in a whole, because it's sometimes not really obvious what to do and how to use the specification in all details. So to give it a short glimpse, it's really starting from the data model backed by the data product and data contracts, describe interfaces for the model programmatically, and type safe. That's the most important fact. I'm totally type safe all the time. And available solutions so far, so there are things coming up in the background actually, are the Microsoft TypeSpec and TextLang. And on the other hand, what is really important is because when we already have an API operations pipeline, is really to add actually the data engineering steps to be really aware of the possibilities we have there. As a conclusion, don't talk about API first with development teams. Just say them, we build APIs, or we'll build APIs. Honor the skills of the development team and have trust in them. So when the development teams are saying, we have specific languages, trust them. It's fair enough. And guide them towards consumer centricity and the idea of API first. So I think I'm totally on time. Thank you.